My mum was a single parent, and as such, she worked almost constantly and was nearly always tired, and so she was not the most present parent. But despite being only 2 years older than my sister, I was headstrong and insisted on acting as the man in the family, putting on a tough face and powering through things, like comforting my sister when she had a nightmare so we didn't wake my mum. This all happened while we were on a shopping trip. I'd say this was about 7, making my sister Elise about 5. She was a talkative child, always required someone's attention, and yet neither my mum or I noticed that she had disappeared until we reached the checkout. Thinking that she had simply gotten distracted and wandered off, my mum wasn't too concerned, and I volunteered to go and get her. I walked past the aisles, peeking my head down each to try and spot her dark, curly hair and a pink jumper when I heard a muffled crying and a woman trying to shush someone. Rounding the corner to investigate, I saw something chilling. A woman crouched down, desperately trying to quieten my younger sister with her hands vice-like on her wrist. Seeing me, the woman put a smile on and tried to shoo me away. She said, "Don't worry, she just had a little fall." I vividly remember little 7-year-old me straighten up, puffing my chest to look as tough as possible, with a glare that I spat out, "That's my sister." Her smile dropped and she let go of Alice, and I grabbed her and ran back to the front where Mum was waiting outside. She didn't seem too concerned about the lady. She was probably exhausted, to be honest, despite the nail marks on my sister's arm, and we just went home that day. I'm 21 now, but I still think about that day sometimes, and it always gives me a sick feeling in my stomach. So I live by a freeway overpass. I can cross it and go to stores, and it's about 10 or 11:30 p.m. at night and foggy, and I wanted to grab some food. I decided to go somewhere where I needed to cross the overpass or walk almost a mile extra to get around. At the end of the overpass, too, is my city's largest cemetery. So I'm walking and I get to the halfway point of the bridge and I see a male form in all black with a black hood on. It looks like the person was wearing a hoodie or something, and I just had this oh shit feeling about this, but continued walking anyway. Out of nowhere, though, I see this thing hop over the overpass. I screamed, but hacked up phlegm instead, and my asshole puckered, and I seriously started to cry and ran to the spot. If this thing jumped, it would have hit the grass median that divided the freeway. But when I got there, I saw nothing. Nothing at all. I stood there and looked and ran across the overpass and saw nothing on the other side, too. No thud, no honking, no screeching of tires. I stood there sweating in 36-degree weather in a panic. Once I convinced myself that I had just hallucinated, I continued walking. I get my food and I head back, and I get to the end of the overpass to walk back and got hit with just complete dread. It was out of nowhere, and I'm trying to remain calm and listen to my footsteps on the pavement. And then I heard it. Shuffling of another person's feet. I swing around and see nothing. I was the only person on the overpass. I continue walking and can hear footsteps on the wet pavement. I would stop and I would hear additional footsteps too. Well, that's it. I decided to walk in a jogging pace at this point. I'm a good 250 feet from home and I'm moving, and I hear the footsteps behind me again. Honestly, I'm about to lose it, and I'm at the edge of the overpass before it hits my street. There's a large puddle at the corner, and I still can't see anything, but I can hear it all. I stomp into the puddle and run across the street, and then I heard a splash in the puddle and footsteps too. At this point, I'm near my house and I'm still turning around and constantly seeing nothing. I cross the road and still hear mine and another person's footsteps. I hit my driveway and yell, "You're not welcome here," and immediately the footsteps stopped. The worst part about all of this was me fumbling for my keys with my hands frozen and trying to unlock my door, thinking that I was about to get murdered or something. I have no clue what the fuck I encountered that night, but man, it was creepy. This happened a little over 10 years ago when I was living on some off-campus apartment at the Art Institute. Good prices, but caveat being that one person in the apartment had to be enrolled at the school. My girlfriend at the time, Emily, lived in the same apartment complex too. And there were a lot of parties there with everyone being students, and with it being off-campus, things had a tendency to get a little out of hand. It was still pretentious, but pretty wild activities from time to time, if you catch my drift. I just so happened to be over her place for a few hours, which was probably about 20 seconds walking distance of my apartment. I knew that my roommate and my friend Brandon were hanging out at my place while I was over at Emily's, and I was about half awake, about to drift off to sleep in her room, when I hear a pounding at her door. I assumed it was Brandon just trying to mess with me, likely because he was bored and no parties were happening that night. Well, I meandered to the door in my boxes with 100% certainty that it was him. It was about probably midnight or so, I'd say. But for some reason, before I touched the handle, I paused for no reason. It just had a weird feeling. I peeked through the peephole, and in the yellow light, I see this man boy with a buzzed head and a stained white t-shirt. So I do what I normally do and just stand there in silence until he leaves, right? I didn't realize, though, that the door was unlocked, and I start to hear the guy turn the knob to open the fucking door, and as it cracks open slowly, I pull it open full force. As directly as I could manage, I was like, "What do you need?" And he just kind of stands there moving back and forth and mumbles, "Oh, and is so-and-so home?" Channeling some other identity, I just kind of straighten my back and, in a deepish voice, think of someone telling a demon that they aren't welcome in their home. I go, "You've got the wrong place, buddy." You always know shit's about to go down when buddy gets thrown out there, right? Well, he drops the act and his face totally changes to a grim-looking meth face. And he starts smiling and is like, "Oh yeah, you sure?" At that point, I just go, "Yep, get the fuck out of here," and slam the door and lock it. I called my friend Brandon. He's a very big guy, and he starts hauling ass out of my apartment and running around the complex trying to find the guy, which turned out to be two dudes. One must have been hiding during the exchange. They scrambled and either hid or just hightailed it out of there, but I still wonder sometimes what would have happened had I just rolled over in bed that night and didn't answer the door. Yesterday I took my dog to the park, as I normally do. It was a cold but sunny day, so when I got there, about half the parking lot was full. However, everyone seemed to be leaving, and as we were walking toward the wooded part of the park, I noticed a guy dressed in all black with big sunglasses and a huge handkerchief covering his face. It kinda gave me the creeps, but I just ignored him. When we were halfway through the park, I heard a man yelling and I couldn't see anyone. But my dog was standing very alert and growling, and I turned around and the man that I saw earlier was standing right behind me. He says, "You stupid fucking bitch." And I say, "Excuse me?" And he says, "Move your fucking car." And I say, "Mine?" And he says, "Yes, you stupid fucking bitch, move your fucking car." And I'm like, "Well, is there something wrong with it?" And then he says, "You've parked way too close to me and there's an empty fucking parking lot right next to it." At this point, I'm just totally confused and, to be quite frank, a little scared. I told him that it wasn't empty when I got there, but I was still happy to move it because I didn't want to piss him off any more than he already was. He followed me and walked behind me muttering cuss words and insults. And then he said, "You're so lucky I found you. I have a crowbar in my car and I was going to smash your windows and slash your tires. And then I was going to find you and smash your fucking head in, but I'm having a good day today. I'm in a really good mood. It's just stupid bitches like you that ruin things. I had my mace in my hand at this point and my knife in the other, and we kept walking towards the parking lot, but he just kept getting angrier. And at one point he screamed, "Aren't you going to apologize?" I told him that I was sorry and that I hoped that he has a better day, and he said, "Better day? I'm having a great day. You're alive, aren't you?" Well, I started to walk faster at that, and so did he. I made a full sprint to my car, and the guy just stopped and watched me, laughing. He started throwing sticks and rocks at my car too, while laughing as I was driving off. Obviously, I filed a police report, but I don't know if he was just trying to scare me or what, but I sure hope that he doesn't actually hurt someone in the future, because, man, what a psycho. This was back in 2009, and I was 15 and started my freshman year in high school. The first 2 months were great. I was meeting new people, catching up with friends from middle school, and just settling in. One day, though, I was drawing a picture on my binder and having fun, and a girl in my math class appeared in front of my desk. She seemed interested in my artwork and introduced herself. Pam was abnormally short for her age and had greasy curly hair, a face and chest covered in acne, orange teeth, and a strange gaze. She wasn't looking at me or around me. She was kind of looking through me. I ignored the uneasy feeling from her gaze and thought that it was just me being anxious about meeting someone new. I was quiet and insecure back then. I usually hung out with nerds and geeks, so I would feel more social and accepted. I introduced myself to her and asked her if she liked art. She said, "I love art, and I draw too." She said this while maintaining her intrusive eye contact, mind you. I said, "Oh, that's cool. Maybe you could show me your art sometime." She kept her eye contact steady, like she was waiting for me to say more, and I just kind of awkwardly looked back down at my binder and just kept drawing. She seemed to get the point, though, and walked away. Pam came back about 10 minutes later with a specific piece of art and put it on top of my binder. It was a shaky line work with no erase marks, and it was my drawing from a week ago. She had obviously somehow taken it from my backpack and traced it and just sloppily coloured it with a Sharpie or something. "Hey, that's, wait a minute." I said this while checking my backpack. And yes, my drawing was stolen. I obviously immediately got annoyed and said, "You stole that from me." I said it too while crumbling the paper up. I had a quick childish temper back then. She said, "No, I didn't. This is mine," with a blank look on her face. She snatched the crumpled drawing from me and ran back to her desk. She didn't look embarrassed, mind you. She didn't look mad. She just kind of grinned and stared at me for the rest of the class. At first, I thought maybe I just overreacted, that I just made an idiot out of myself since the whole class was watching. But then I realized that Pam was enjoying this drama. And after that, I became her target for the rest of the year. I obviously avoided her like the plague for the next month or so. She wasn't normal, and she creeped me out. But it didn't stop her from approaching me. I noticed every week or so my drawings would go missing too. My friends would call her out for stealing and tracing, and she would somehow cause harm to them. She had actually lured my best friend into being alone with her at one point. She claimed that she was returning the drawings and she didn't want me to see them, and my best friend went to retrieve these drawings and Pam just sucker punched her in the nose. My best friend was in shock, obviously, and she ran to the office to tell an adult what happened, but it wasn't on camera. They also claimed that Pam was a sweet girl that would never hurt anyone. Two things here, though. Pam had obviously put in effort to get on the good side of anyone with authority, and she lured my friend into the girls' locker room knowing that there were no cameras. This freaked out all of my friends, and I was scared too, but that fear eventually turned into rage. I mean, who did she think she was? No one had even thought that she would go that far too, but man, it got so much worse. So one day, I confronted her and I told her that if she ever touched one of my friends again, that I'll follow her home and beat her ass. She seemed to be enjoying these threats too, and she grinned with her nasty teeth showing and her breath smelled like a fucking carcass. And then she said, "Don't threaten me with a good time," forcing out a giggle. Any adult that I told about this would ignore me too. My parents were just too busy fighting each other to listen, and the school staff just didn't care about drama. The only ones that I could trust were the ones directly involved and my brothers. No one could do anything without proof, and Pam was honestly really sneaky. I was stuck and I was furious, and quite honestly, I wanted revenge. Pam showed up the next day with a picture of me and my two brothers at the Detroit Zoo. She had showed it to the other students, and she claimed that the man in the picture was her boyfriend, my oldest brother. She went into detail about how she had had sex with him 3 times a day and that me and my brother were just kids that he was babysitting in the picture. And at this point, she had ruined me mentally. How did she even get that picture? It was my locker. She had found out my combo somehow, obviously, and I was feeling pretty exposed and small at this point. Finally, and the most disturbing thing she pulled, sadly not the last thing though, she had decided that she wanted to get me expelled. She went into the bathroom during lunch one time and hurt herself, and she choked herself in her back straps and hit her head on the hand dryers and slammed herself into the walls, and I only knew this because a girl from my English class witnessed the whole thing. She even asked Pam if she was okay, and Pam answered with, "I'm fine, why do you ask?" As if she hadn't just thrown herself at sharp corners or something. The witness helped, and I was escorted out of my class by 2 school security officers, and they interrogated me for an hour. They asked me where I was at lunch, and if I was sure I wasn't lying, and they asked me if I had a violent family, and all sorts of things. I rolled my eyes after they told me that I was a liar, and I just called my brother. He came in a half an hour later and told them what Pam had been doing, and that they could lose their jobs for interrogating me like this. At this point, they seemed to listen to him because the principal was his old science teacher and they actually got along really well. Thank God for small towns, right? So, I managed to get 3 witnesses in, and I chose the girl from my English class who saw Pam mutilate herself in the bathroom. I chose my best friend who got punched in the face, and I chose an actual teacher that saw Pam take things out of my backpack. Pam claimed that I borrowed her books and she was taking them back. I was in the bathroom at the time. With all this proof, they had no choice but to search Pam's locker. And what they found, I'll never forget. They found photos of me and my family, and they found my schedule and just an unbelievable amount of drawings that I'd done. It was like she had a shrine and she wanted to be me. I was horrified, and they asked me if we had been in a relationship or something, and I said no and that I'm straight. She actually ended up failing her art class too because she had used all of my art for her grades. She was suspended and seemed to have disappeared after getting caught. Honestly, I don't blame her. The whole school was talking about it. I even got some apologies from Pam's little jerk circle, and they told me that they were too afraid to do anything about it and that she would show up at their homes randomly after school. She had so many people wrapped around her nasty little fingers, and I had a feeling that Pam had something terrible happen to her as a child or something, and that's why she was the way that she was. But disturbingly enough, the last I heard about her, she had actually pushed her grandmother down the stairs and left her there until the cops showed up. Apparently, a concerned elderly neighbor heard yelling in a usually quiet house and called the cops. I don't know what's wrong with Pam, and I don't know why she did the things that she did, but Pam, please stay away from me. This happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still a bit shaken by it. So my husband and I, we like to take long drives in the desert with our dog. We live just outside of Las Vegas and are fortunate to live in a city with abundant and beautiful areas to stargaze or use a telescope. My husband just got one for his birthday in October, so he was excited to try it out and all that. We drove our Kia up to a popular overlook and he took out the telescope. He showed me a bunch of constellations and we even saw a shooting star. The doggo sat in the car too with the two windows rolled down at this time, and my dog is a bitch straight up. They weren't kidding when they named female dogs that too. She's an American cattle dog and she saved my ass before from a home invasion. She's protective of both me and her dad. Anyway, hubby had to pee and he told me to wait in the car for him. So I got in and locked the door, and meanwhile I'm browsing Reddit when I hear gravel moving, and thinking it's my hubby, I remark, that was fast, and suddenly my dog goes berserk. She's snarling, barking, and so I turn around and there's a dude that's not my husband. The idiot made a huge mistake though. He put his hand through an open window with a crazy 63-pound dog. She's got his hand, and so he's just screaming. I'm screaming and my husband is yelling as he runs towards us with his pants half on. The dog lets his arm go and the guy takes off, and I call the cops. My husband tries chasing after the guy, but he's 6'3" and 280 pounds, and this guy was fast. Anyway, the cops do show up eventually and tell us that they'll look out for him, but to maybe stay away from that area that night. The cops in our town are just an absolute joke. Anyway, the doggo got a cup of Dairy Queen that night, and we're very grateful for her. This past weekend, I went out on a date with an old friend from high school and was dropped back off at home at around 11:30 p.m. I live in a two-story apartment building located near the outer edge of town in a small residential area, and usually by this time the streets are empty and it's pretty quiet. I entered inside through the front door and began up the stairs, and I was 3 or 4 steps from the top of the stairwell when I saw somebody I've never seen before sitting down on the floor with his back leaning against my apartment door, looking down at what I first thought was a phone, but was actually a box cutter, which he was playing around with. I was flabbergasted and quietly asked if he could move so I could get inside, but he didn't even acknowledge my existence. I quietly walked back down the stairs and knocked on a fellow tenant's door, but didn't get an answer. I tried on 3 others when somebody finally came too. I told him about the creepy dude with the box cutter, and he agreed to help me out and have the police on the phone if anything were to escalate, or if the man refused to leave or something. We both went up the stairs, and the guy was still sitting there, messing around with his box cutter, and I stood there observing while the other tenant demanded that he move out of the way or else. Once again, no answer, not even a change in facial expression. I walked back down the stairs and dialed the closest apartment, and they were going to send a trooper over as soon as they could. After sitting outside for a few minutes and still talking to dispatch, the man must have finally realized that he wasn't welcome, and I watched as he walked right past me out of the apartment building and onto the street, before just disappearing into the distance. When the police arrived, they took statements from me and the other tenant too, while another one of their units drove around to try and locate the man, which they did. However, because he wasn't actually breaking any laws, they weren't able to take any action against him, but ensured us that he would be charged with trespassing if he ever comes back. I don't know what the guy was doing, just sitting there in front of my door playing with a box cutter, but man, it was pretty disturbing. This happened many years ago, shortly after moving into a new house with my parents. I was around 10 years old at the time, I'd say. My room had one big sliding glass window that faced the steps leading up to our front door, and being up a hilly driveway in a somewhat remote part of the city, we never locked our doors or closed our windows unless we were running the heater. But the house needed a bit of work, I must admit, and one of the flaws was that every now and then the wind would cause the screen on my window to fall out. Well, no big problem, I guess. I would wake up and stick it back in and just go back to bed anyway. But one night, a couple of weeks after moving in, I had gone to bed after watching a movie with my parents and woke up to my screen falling out, again. No big deal, but I was really tired and half asleep, so decided to just go back to bed and deal with it later. I doze off, just to be woke up again by a man's voice. Hey, wake up, you little shit. I'm still half asleep. I open my eyes to see a dark figure leaning into my bedroom window trying to get my attention. Being young and barely awake, I immediately assumed it was my dad playing some weird prank on me, and I told him, "Go away, I'm trying to sleep," and didn't think anything of it. I heard something along the lines of "all right," and then the figure walked down the steps and away from the window. After a few minutes of trying to get back to sleep, my mind starts ticking a bit, and I get up and go down the hall and ask my dad why he did that, to find that he was fast asleep, and that was definitely not him. The cops were obviously called, and they searched the surrounding area, but never found anyone out there. A month or so passed before the second incident happened, and this time I had fallen asleep with my lights on and windows closed, only to wake up to knocking on my window. After what happened the first time, I woke up immediately to find a bald man that I didn't recognize knocking on my window and beckoning me to come open it for him. This time, I started yelling for my dad, and once the man at the window figured out what I was doing, he bolted down the steps and away from my house. Again, the cops were called, but the guy was never found. I slept with my windows and blinds closed for a long time after that. My girlfriend and I took some time out to do some backpacking and travel the world. We went to some incredible places and met really interesting people, but our most interesting story is probably this one. As I said, we traveled all over: Myanmar, Bolivia, Mexico, and many places that have some unsafe reputations. However, we're both pretty good at reading people and staying out of trouble, so we never had any major incidences. We were on a fairly tight budget too at this point in our journey, as we had recently been to Japan and wanted to chill for a bit before finding some work in Vietnam. We decided to volunteer on a Cambodian island. It's a bit of a luxury island, full of resorts that we could normally afford to stay at, so it seemed like a pretty good gig. I worked behind the bar at this resort, and my girlfriend worked in the restaurant. In return, we got to sleep in the dorm and our own meals for free and all that. The manager told me that since I was working behind the bar and Scottish, that an English guy who lived on the island would likely come and see me, and that his name was Dog. It didn't take long for this to take place too. A fairly old guy in his late 50s, early 60s, came into the bar, and he was quite tall and still powerfully built, and was accompanied by a massive Rottweiler, which he quickly told me was also called Dog. We had a bit of a laugh taking the piss out of each other, and he was making fun of me of being Scottish, and I was making fun of him going by the name Dog and being English standard British bullshit. I noticed too that he was always wearing wife beaters which said Dog's Offshore Bar and had a picture of his dog, the Rottweiler, on it. I got to know more about Dog the man. He used to work in construction and offshore, as did I, so we had quite a bit to talk about. And heaps of opportunity to talk too, as he usually arrived for his first beer at 7 a.m. He was clearly an alcoholic. But he never struck me as a bad person early on, just a sadly complicated one, like when you talk to someone who's homeless or something. Anyone who's ever been to Vietnam or Thailand or Cambodia or any Southeast Asian country will understand how rare it is to see a dog that's not some kind of street mutt or tiny pet. But his huge dog would stand out even in Europe, however. Even for a Rottweiler, it was massive. It was really muscular with a metal chin to give some semblance of control if it was to kick off. I really liked dogs too, so I was quite interested in what this huge dog was doing on the island, and I always made sure to have some water out for it. It was friendly enough, but never left his owner's side, and seemed to be a working dog in terms of its intensity. It was clearly a guard dog. It turned out that the dog was actually a Finnish drug dealer's dog, and that dog, the person, had bought him. He told me the dog had an attack command, and he kept him primed by using it often on other island dogs. He told me that it killed multiple dogs this way, and I didn't believe this at first, but there was an island dog the manager would often leave food out for, and this dog would come near the bar usually when Dog's monster dog wasn't about. But that night he must have been hungry enough to brave it, and Dog hissed the command, and the Rottweiler bounded for the island dog, knocking over chairs and all sorts until he was called off. It was actually pretty scary. One night I was sat at the bar just talking with Dog about this job that I'd be taking on soon at a digital marketing company. I was in talks with the CEO at this company at the time. It was a digital marketing job in which I would work from home or coffee shops updating and improving websites. He said that it sounded made up and that the company was likely some kind of con to get my bank details. I told him that it was a real company and that I'd Googled it. He was really drunk at this point, and the restaurant was now closed, so my girlfriend joined us and we were all having a beer at the bar. He told my girlfriend how I believed everything I read online and how I shouldn't do that. He said people publish all kinds of made-up shit on there, and I asked what he was referring to, and he said never Google me. So I was like, how could I Google you? I mean, your name is Dog. If I Googled you, I would just see a picture of an Alsatian or something. But then I remembered those tops that he wore. Dog's offshore bar. So I told him, I'm going to Google you, laughing. But he was quite annoyed by that. And at this point, other than owning a weaponized canine, I thought that he was pretty harmless. But boy, was I wrong. I began reading out loud the interesting things that I found out about his bar and related stories. One of particular interest was about a conviction. The joking and laughing stopped, and I quickly stopped reading out loud. I looked quickly to my girlfriend, and I could see the smile leave her face too as she realized we were drinking with a killer. It turned out that this guy had murdered his Thai wife and then been briefly imprisoned before bailing out. You can post bail for murder in Thailand, and then fleeing the country before trial. He had stabbed her, and his alibi to the police was that he couldn't have killed her because he was fucking a ladyboy on the beach at the time. He told us that he had been framed and that his wife's ex was in the police and he had killed her for moving on and all sorts of stuff. I was nodding along to everything he said and trying my best to show that I agreed with him, whilst making sure the machete I used to open up coconuts for cocktails was in easy reach should his beast be given any command words. He told us about how hard it was being one of the few white guys in a Thai prison, how he had to attack guards to get into solitary confinement, and they then beat him mercilessly. He told us that they used to leave shanks in his room and put him in the yard with pedophiles for him to kill. He told us, too, that he had killed before he went to prison and that he killed while he was inside too, but that he didn't kill his wife. His wife was apparently a Thai prostitute that he met while trafficking women from Thailand to Singapore on his boat. The same one that he used to flee Thailand after his arrest and set up his bar, Dog's Offshore Bar, with the tagline, Dogs Welcome, wives must be kept on leashes or under control. Well, we both acted like we believed him, and eventually he left. The whole night, however, I was waiting next to the door for him and his dog to just come for us. I even propped up a bin against the door so that anyone coming in would knock it over so that we would maybe have a chance to react. In fact, I nearly attacked my friend when he came in. It was pretty fucked up. After this, we quickly decided to leave and only saw Dog again once more. My girlfriend was opening a can of coconut milk for a curry, and he came by and jokingly asked if she needed a knife, and he patted his back pocket. The guy is known as Mick the Pom, or Mick the Dog if you want to Google this. If you Google dogs offshore bar, you'll see what I did too. He was living in a tent on the island with his dog keeping watch while he slept, and I'm not sure if he's still there now, but man, talking to a killer, it was creepy. When I was 13, I started modelling. I did fairly well, but honestly, I hated the business. They were just really strict about my weight. I mean, I couldn't get over 100 pounds or I'd lose my contracts. I couldn't dye my hair or have any piercings without permission, and they would often check on me to make sure that I haven't gone against their wishes. But fast forward 2 years, though, to me being 15. One day I got an email from a fitness photographer. This wasn't uncommon for me to get random emails because my agency would give my email out once they booked me something. But this is also about 12 years ago, and back then I naively didn't worry too much about anything really. You know, the common teenage mentality of nothing's ever going to get me. In the email, the photographer told me that he'd like to do a shoot, and the compensation that he promised me, I would have made more money than I have of any other shoots. So, obviously, being money-driven, I emailed him back and told him yes, I'd be interested, and he sent me one back after that saying that he needed some sample photos of my calves and my feet and my backside and my breasts to make sure that I had the physique he wanted. I was a little cautious, I must admit, but I thought, you know, he's offering me a lot of money and I should probably do what he's asking or he's going to find somebody else. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to feel pressured to send him the pictures, and I did feel the pressure. Of course, I had it in the back of my mind that I shouldn't do it, but the money was real good. So I sent the pictures clothed, and he said that he couldn't tell my proper sizing and I need to send him nude photos. Obviously, I declined this and told him that I'd be willing to set up a meeting and his assistant can take measurements, but I would not send nude photos over the internet. He set up a meeting but cancelled last minute, and a few weeks later he was on the news. He apparently got busted for child pornography, and shocker, he was not a fitness photographer. Who knows what could have happened to me had I actually gone to meet him, though. I never found out how he even got my email, in fact, because my agency said that they never spoke with the guy. So my parents divorced when I was really young. I do remember after the divorce that they both lived in apartments in the middle of Tennessee. Well, not long before I was to start kindergarten, my mum remarried to my stepdad and we moved to a small house in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, about 30 miles outside of Birmingham. It was in a good school district and near my stepdad's family, who would be helping with my brand new little sister. This was actually a really exciting time for my other little sister and me, and we finally had cousins, aunts and uncles and grandparents that we would get to see all the time instead of travelling for the holidays to New England or Florida only once or twice a year. We didn't even care that they were all step-family, we were just happy to be around other people. The cousins that we saw most were Brady and Micah. Their mum and our mum worked odd jobs to make ends meet and helped each other out with childcare while my stepdad worked as a truck driver and Uncle Randy worked as an EMT ambulance driver. So our house was an odd setup. We lived in a little two-room house that actually sat almost right behind a large old farmhouse that no one lived in. Whenever Brady and Micah would come and visit, we would always end up going through the house and always wondered why it was still set up like a house since no one lived there. The beds in the bedrooms were made, there were a couple of plates in the sink in the kitchen for the last few years. It was like someone just left for work one day and never came home. So after a day of playing in the house, I found a plate in the kitchen that I thought was very pretty. I knew that we were about to go visit my grandparents in Florida for the summer and thought that it would be a perfect gift for my Southern Belle plate-collecting grandmother. I took it back home, and my mum helped me clean it and get it ready that evening before sending me off to bed. After my mum sent me to bed, she followed her nightly routine of smoking a cigarette, dumping the ashtray, sweeping off the porch before locking it, and then watching the nightly news before going to bed herself. While she was in bed, she kept smelling a burning cigarette, though. She couldn't figure out why, though, and even got up to check the garbage to make sure that her last one was not still lit. And it wasn't. So she went back to bed. She's almost asleep, convinced that the smell is just stuck in her nose, when all the lights in her room turn on. She turns to get out of bed and comes face to face with me, standing next to her bed, clutching my blanket and crying. She asks me why I turned on all the lights, and I just break down crying and barely get the words out. I say that I didn't turn on any lights, not even the ones in our room or in the living room. Carolyn did it. I told her to stop and turn the lights back off, but she just laughed at me. My mum was really confused and asked who Carolyn was. I explained that Carolyn is my friend that I made. Normally she just turns on some lights at night, and she didn't have lights in her house next door until she was 6 like me and likes to play with them. But when I tell her to stop and go home to sleep, she turns off the lights and walks away. But tonight she turned on all the lights, and when I told her to stop, she laughed at me and walked into our closet instead of going home. And now she doesn't want to leave, even though I want her to, and she made fun of me. My mum got out of bed and picked me up, and as she was carrying me back to my room, she quickly discovered that every light, every lamp, every ceiling light, even the pull chain lamp under the kitchen counter, they were all on. She took me to my room and laid me in bed and checked the closet just to make sure that Carolyn wasn't in there, and turned off the bedroom light so that my sisters wouldn't wake up. She went out into the hall and reached for the light switch, but before she could even touch it, every light in the house just went off. Mum was convinced that we had lost power, so she hit the light switch to check, and the whole light came back on like normal. As odd as it was, she just put it down to faulty electrics and went back to bed. As she laid in bed, the cigarette smell came back though, and she sat up trying to remember if she smelled it while dealing with me, or if she was just too preoccupied and freaked out to notice. While she was trying to remember, she heard the screen door to the back porch open and slam shut again. Of course, she knew that she had locked it before going to bed, so she wasted no more time and picked up the phone and called Uncle Randy, since this was before the prevalence of cell phones, and it wasn't like my stepdad would be able to make it from Arkansas back to Alabama in any time quick enough for the circumstances anyway. So, for 12 minutes, my mum just sat frozen in her bed, scared to move, listening for any other sign of an intruder or that of any of the three of us had woken up. Then she heard a car pull up into the driveway, followed by Randy banging on the screen door and yelling her name. She ran to the kitchen and threw open the back door, turned on the back porch light, and immediately saw it. Between her and Randy were about 20 burnt cigarette butts and cigarette ashes just strewn across the floor that she had just cleaned an hour before, and a locked screen door. Last year, I went out of state for my first year of college to a school in Indiana. In the first week, I formed many friendships, and one of those was with a boy who would end up becoming my stalker. He was fairly normal at the start, and I genuinely enjoyed his company, as well as his roommates, and we became quite close, spending a lot of time together. Soon, I had developed friendships with other people, and he became a part of my friend group. About a month into knowing him, I started to get a feeling that he liked me more than a friend. I still acted normal around him because I didn't want to draw attention to it, because the feeling wasn't mutual, and I just didn't want to ruin our friendship. One night about 3 months into school, though, everything changed. This night, all of my friends came to my dorm room. At the time, it was a double that I was occupying by myself. to drink before they went to a party. I had told my friends that they could drink in my room, but I didn't want to go out because I was very upset by a hurricane that was hitting my hometown in Florida. All of my friends were supportive of this, except my soon-to-be stalker, that is. But throughout the time that he was in my room, he was making jokes about how dramatic I was being, and even when everyone else told him to stop, he just wouldn't let up. Finally, everyone was ready to leave to go to the party, and my stalker is the last to exit my room. Before going, he tells me that he cares about me and that if I change my mind and decide to go out, or if I need anything, that I should text him. Which I found strange given his previous behavior, but I figured that he had come to his senses and was attempting to be a good friend. A couple of hours after my friends leave, I get a text from another friend telling me to come help out one friend who was too drunk and is vomiting, so I change and I walk to a building. Upon arriving, I find out that she's fine now and they put her into bed. I go outside of their building and cry about what's happening at home on the steps by myself. I get a text from my stalker asking if I had changed my mind, and in that moment I was sad and figured that if I went out with them and maybe had a few drinks that I would feel better. I tell him where I am and ask if the group wants to meet up, and he says that they'll come but arrives alone. He suggested that we hanged out in my room, but I told him that I wanted to go and see the group. He didn't seem to be too happy with this too, but I call one of my other friends to see where they are, and we go to another dorm building where they were drinking. But the party was apparently busted, so they just left. When we get inside, we have a hard time figuring out which floor they're on and what room they're in. My stalker is visibly drunk at this point and pushes me into one of the connecting suites that's vacant. He begins to make fun of me again for being upset and is becoming very touchy. I push him off of me and tell him to stop. We finally find one of our friends, and that friend tells us that we can meet him in his room and he has alcohol there. My stalker suggests that we just go to his room instead because he's in a fight with one of the other guys and doesn't want to see him, and I believe this and agree. When we get to his room, we are greeted by his roommate and a bunch of his roommate's friends. My stalker grabs a backpack with his alcohol and says that we should just go to my room and our friend group can meet up with us, so we do this too. My dorm had 2 beds in it, and my stalker sits down on the one that I sleep on, so I decided to sit on the other one. He puts on a movie and everything is normal at first. I immediately begin texting my one friend whose room everyone was in and tell him to bring our friends over to my room. But my friends are all drunk at this point, and everyone I texted just wasn't making any sense. My stalker then gets into the same bed as me and lays beside me, and I immediately feel uncomfortable and start rapidly texting my friends and tell them that so-and-so is acting strange, and that they need to come now. He sees I'm on my phone a lot, and so my stalker grabs my phone from me and tells me I need to take a 10-minute break from it. During this time, he becomes really touchy too and suggests we try this trick with my jewel where he exhales it into my mouth, to which I reject. I tell him that it's been 10 minutes and that he needs to give me my phone back, but he denies knowing what I'm talking about. I stand up and move to the other bed because I feel uncomfortable, and he gets up and moves as well. I sit at the very end of the bed, opposite him, and demand my phone this time. He continues to play dumb, and instead he moves closer to me and tries to playfully touch me. Well, I've had enough at this point, and I tell him that he needs to give me my phone right now and that it isn't funny anymore. He tells me that he needs to go to the bathroom at this point. While he's in the bathroom, I grab my laptop and I message all of my friends to come to my room ASAP and tell them that he's being really creepy and I need their help. Once he returns, he tells me right away that he wants to level with me and that he thinks we should hook up. I'd been making it very clear the entire time that I did not want that, and thought that he would be able to read my body language and the situation and realize that I was clearly uncomfortable. I tell him no and that I just want to be his friend and not ruin the friendship. But he doesn't listen. He comes over to me and starts playfully grabbing me, and when I push him off and tell him to stop, he pushes me down onto the bed and tries to come over me. He grabs my legs and pulls me into him, and I was thankfully sober and was able to kick him away from me and get up and just run into the hallway. He doesn't leave my room and begins to insult me and tell me that he never wanted to be my friend and only wanted to sleep with me, and that guys and girls can never be friends. It always has to lead to something more. He then says that he would never date me and that I'm too emotionally unstable for him, and a slew of other insults. One thing that he said that especially scares me is that he was raised to take what he wants no matter what when defending his actions. I don't know what to do and just start crying and yelling at him to leave my room. He refuses and then makes fun of me for crying. At this point, he still has my phone and won't give it back or leave too. I threaten to call the campus police on him if he doesn't leave, and finally, he agrees. After that night, he texted me every day for a week, trying to talk to me, and one of my friends told me to listen to what he had to say, so I do. He ended up confessing his love for me and told me that he still thinks that we cannot just be friends, even after I said multiple times that that is all we ever could be, and ultimately I told him that I think we need to just stop talking. All of my other friends knew what happened and dropped him as well at this point, and he spent months trying to talk to me, and honestly became just completely obsessed. I would still hang out with his roommates, but I would only go to their room when he wasn't there. On the few occasions where he would come in, he would later text me paragraphs of how immature I was being for ignoring him. Finally, I said that we could be civil and just be acquaintances to be nice. But that led to him getting really mad at me for still acting uncomfortable around him and just never wanting to hang out with him. At this point, every time I would see him, he would just blow up my phone and text me non-stop about me being fake towards him and that I needed to get over myself, and I eventually just blocked him. After doing this, he got really angry, and he would show up where I was all the time and just stare at me. His roommates would tell me that he talked about me every night, basically for the rest of the school year too. He would try to ask them things about what I was doing and who I was hooking up with and all sorts of things. He would go up to my close girlfriends all of the time too and ask what he could do to fix things with me. He tried to fight a guy who expressed that he was interested in taking me out on a date once too. A few months after the incident too, he made up an excuse to come to my door. He lived in the same floor as me, almost every other day. He started trying to talk with me in the hallways, and he would offer me these things and even bought me a Christmas present once. The last few months of school, he told his roommate that his goal was to sleep with me before graduation and that he thinks that I want him and I'm just playing games with him. Trust me, I in no way want or make it seem that way. The only way I act towards him is just completely disgusted. Even over the summer, he's been texting his roommate about me too. All of my friends tell me that he's stalking me and recognize that the way that I'm acting is in no way asking for his attention. I go back to school in the middle of August and he'll be there, and he'll be living in a frat next year, so I don't have to worry about him being on my floor, but this whole situation still worries me. I think something is really wrong with him emotionally or mentally, and not just because of the way that he's acted towards me, but just in general. I don't want anything to happen to myself or anyone else, and I think that I should do something about it. Looking back on that night, I would say that his behavior and the things that he said were very rapey, and that the people who think if I want something I should take it no matter what are at a higher risk to sexually assault someone for sure. What do you guys think I should do? Do you think I should be worried, or do you think I should just let it go? Let me know in the comments below. My boyfriend and I went on vacation in Sedona, Arizona. There isn't much to do at night, so We bought some movie tickets and went to get gas before the movie. I was in the middle of smoking a cigarette as we pulled into the station, so I got out and sat far away from the pump so I could finish it. A homeless-looking man slowly started walking towards me as soon as I sat down, and something about him just seemed off. When he got close enough to me where I knew he was definitely about to say something, I threw my cigarette down and started walking towards my boyfriend's car. The man put his hands up in a prayer motion, and I told him, I have no money, I have nothing on me, sorry, and tried walking off again. But he stopped me and said, wait, no, I don't want money, please just listen to me, you need to go to the bathroom, I'm saving your life. Well, I ignored him and continued walking very quickly to where my boyfriend was filling up his gas, and the man was still following me. I kept saying, please just leave me alone, and finally, my boyfriend heard me and saw the guy. But when the guy got to my boyfriend filling his tank, he started yelling at me too. He was saying, why the hell would you drop this girl off? What ethnicity are you? I'm trying to save her life. My boyfriend is short-tempered, so he got in the man's face and was telling him to just go away and that he was going to call the cops. Then, the man balled up his fists, pumped his chest out, and got in my boyfriend's face like he was about to fight him. I put my hand out and begged him to just leave us alone because it wouldn't be worth it if we fought him. Luckily, the man walked away, but my boyfriend was super pissed and was yelling at him. He stopped pumping his gas and drove to the park in front of the station so that he could report the situation. The man had his stuff out on the side of the gas station, and when he saw us park, he started screaming at us again and looking at me while he rubbed himself and told me that what I should do to him. This was obviously very, very uncomfortable for me, and my boyfriend tried getting out of the car, but then the man whipped out a pocket knife. He wasn't walking towards us with it, but he was playing with it in a taunting kind of way. I told my boyfriend to just get in and to drive off because I didn't want him to slash our tyres and us be stuck because no tyre place is open late in small Sedona. He listened to me and we drove back to the theatre, and we ended up returning our tickets and drove back to the gas station to make a report a couple of minutes later. We found out that the cops conveniently drove in right after we left, and the man just tried fighting them, so he was arrested and taken. Thank you, Karma, but to be quite honest, I often think what would have happened to me if I'd gone in that bathroom with this guy. So, I don't live in the greatest area, nor in the nicest apartment, so I'm always kind of checking my surroundings when I'm out and about. Nothing crazy, but just being aware of what's going on around me. This being said, the other night I decided that the mountain of dirty clothes inhabiting my closet was bordering on disgusting, and it was time to do one of my best favourite chores, laundry. I don't mind doing laundry itself, but the laundry room in this building always gives me the creeps. It's in the dank and dark basement of the building, and you always have to grope the wall for the light switch. It really would make an excellent location for a horror film, to be honest. So, I go down and throw my laundry in the machine, and everything's going fine and dandy. Come back 40 minutes later, throw it in the dryer, and nothing out of the usual. Yet. An hour later, I go back down in the basement to collect my stuff out of the dryer. Well, when I turn on the light, the dryer door is open and my shit is just strewn about on the ground, hanging out of the dryer and everything. And to top it all off, they were all still wet, which was the worst part because I didn't want to have to keep coming down to the laundry room because I'm a lazy shit. Anyway, normally I'd be like, whatever, because sometimes people open dryers and just don't close them, but this really looked like someone rummaged through my stuff. Shrugging this off, I put my stuff back in, and that's when I get like a sharp chill running down my back. Like, it was so random, but I genuinely felt like I wasn't alone. So I turn around back to the elevator because, like I previously stated, lazy shit, and all of a sudden I I hear the sound of someone frantically running up the stairs and on the other side of the room, almost as if they'd been spotted or something. I get all my laundry back to my apartment and notice that I'm missing some stuff, but at this point I'm kind of creeped out, so I'm not in the mood to go snooping around looking for some t-shirts. So I kind of just forget about it until a couple of days later I received an email from our landlord telling all the residents that a homeless guy not only broke into the building, but he performed sexual acts upon himself in the laundry room, then started a fire and went around the building trying to break into people's unlocked apartments. So, I'm guessing this guy went through my stuff, probably took something, did God knows what with it, and then started an actual fucking fire for some reason. I don't know exactly what he was doing down there when I was down there, but it's creepy to think that this guy was probably just feet away from me. I'm what I would most certainly call a creep magnet. I get weirdos all the time, and it's actually become a bit of a joke that I share with my friends and co-workers, telling them of the many, many creepers that I've encountered in my time as a retail employee. I get all kinds of people in my store, and I'm known very well for my bright attitude and overly chipper way of being, which has come to be loved by my regulars and newcomers alike. It's more than likely a contributing factor in why I get so many weirdos too. And probably my height. I'm actually a really short girl, standing at 4'8", and looking about 5 years younger than my age of 21. I'm rather filled out for how young I look too, so that's probably another reason as well. But on to the story. So, today was like just any other day. Just another ordinary day working by myself in the store and checking out customers, stocking shelves in my moments away from the register, and a normal day. At some point while on the register though, I greeted a man with a large dark beard, bald and wearing glasses as he came through the door. He immediately smiled and got that surprised look on his face that I've come to know as the, oh shoot, I'm totally going to creep on this girl today, look. But no biggie though, I'm used to it and I know how to handle myself. Eventually, after about an hour or two of being on register, I'd pretty much cleaned up the store of my customers and moved on to stocking candy. The man before the beard approaches me with a smile and holds out a large white trash can. Excuse me? Yes? I reply, glancing up from the box that I'm stocking. Are there any more of these in the back? This one doesn't seem to have a lid, he says, gesturing to the large trash can in hand. Yeah, I think so. I can check for you. I smile and am polite, like I always am before turning away and heading towards the stockroom. I notice that he's following me and think nothing of it, but glance back down the aisles for any customers as I walk. Immediately, I take note of the store's emptiness. And, well, shit. I guess it's just us in the store at this point, I think to myself. Moving through the stockroom door, I'm quickly relieved that this guy stops at the entrance. I'll be right back, okay? I say as I make my turn around some full rolltainers, which, due to just receiving a truck, our stockroom is full of them. They stand really tall and are like giant movable walls almost, but very heavy, mind you. Being so small, though, I don't have to move them much to make a path through and see what's on them. So, after only a minute, I've made myself a little path, having 3 ones on my right and left and in front of me, and I decide to give up my search for trash cans. Sighing, I go to turn around and inform him of my defeat, only to find that he's in my tiny path of walls, a very tight squeeze for a man of his stature, standing directly behind me. Hey, did you find him? No, I don't think we have any. I try to laugh and avoid acknowledging the creepy situation, but am very aware of my surroundings. I'm in a very small area with walls at my back and sides towering over myself, and this very robust man is standing in the way of my only exit, in a room very far from any customers with no cameras and no other employees in the store. Pretty much I'm helpless and increasingly growing scared at how this man isn't moving to let me out. I go to voice that I need to return to work after a solid minute goes by, but am not able to get out a single word before he says in this creepy, almost shy voice, "You're just the cutest little thing. Did you know that?" Within an instant, I'm scared and feel ill intention from this guy. I began thinking to myself that this is how I was about to die. Surprising myself, though, I choke out without thinking. I just heard my bell. He looks confused, but doesn't budge, and then says, "What?" And I say, "I just heard my bell. There are people up front who need to be checked out, and they're looking for me." I stand nervously, knowing full well that neither of us heard the familiar ching from the service bell that I keep on the register. Okay, but what about my trash can?" he asks, stepping forward, but taking a glance back toward the trash can. And again, with lightning thinking, I blurt out, "I'll mark it down half price, okay? No big deal," laughing and trying to act like nothing is out of the ordinary. I slip by him, seeing my opening and his turning around, and I try my hardest to walk away, pretending to be calm as I exit the stockroom and then sprint to the front of the store the moment I was out of sight. He wound up leaving without purchasing the trash can, and after that day, I've never seen him since. I don't know why he felt so brazen that he could just come out the back like that with me, and the fact that he kind of cut me off from getting out for well over a minute or two is really weird. Quite honestly, I think the guy was up to no good. So let me begin this story by telling you of how much of an idiot I was. I was drug addicted, alcoholic, riddled with anxiety, and most definitely at my rock bottom. But due to this, I didn't have the best judgment, nor a good judge of character. I started hanging out with a very nasty crowd. Grunge, punk rock, loved to party, never had their own cash, destructive, impulsive. You get the drill. An ex-friend of mine, Bob, started hanging out with me quite a bit more and more as the weeks passed by. Bob worked as a pizza delivery driver, and he never, and I mean never, washed his clothes, to which he owned maybe 3 outfits, including his work uniform, and only women's clothes. The women's clothes were wore to be punky. I saw no shame in that, even thought it was kind of cool how he didn't care what others thought about it. But that also meant that he liked my clothes. So, like a little sister might do, he constantly took my clothes. Keep in mind, he also barely showered. Often he even woke up before 5 p.m. in time for work and jumped off my couch and took a pack of my cigarettes, without asking mind you, and just sped off. Within the 4-month period that he stayed in my house, I literally saw him go take a shower about 5 times, I'd say. And his feet, those feet, man, they were the worst that I'd ever smelled. But long after the situation was dealt with and he was gone, my carpet absorbed that scent too. I tried everything to remove it too, but alas, I left that home with his stench. And he paid nothing, not a single bill, and never contributed to groceries, cleaning, or anything. Nor was he on my lease. Yet, he established residency in my home legally somehow. It didn't bother me so much at the time. As I said, I was at my rock bottom and was basically just happy to have someone to shit show with me. I considered him my goofy, annoying, stinky best friend. Until that wasn't enough for him. He began to become obsessed with me. Very quickly, he went from basically having everything he needed in life for free, while he kept any money for tips that he made, and then just decided on his own accord that we were to be together. Things got pretty awkward and cringe from there too. I mean, if I had to return home from work, a friend's house, etc., he'd cry and follow me to my room. To my fucking room, asking repeatedly why we can't just be together. That we were best friends already, we should date. Mind you, I was not attracted to him. I was going through a divorce at the time, and I just did not want to ruin our friendship. It got to the point where I avoided going home, in fact, and I'd stay with my mother or friends because he'd cry and follow me, desperately trying to convince me to be with him. I'd also often find him in my bed at this point, and he quit his job to have a better chance of seeing me, and I had told him that if this continued, that I would no longer allow him to crash there. At one point, after avoiding him for a few days, Bob really started to come out of his shell. He cornered me, screaming, "I'm sick and tired of being rejected by you fucking women. It's not happening anymore." And now I was scared. I never saw him as a threatening individual, but just as a goofy character. Also, I know some of you may be thinking that I let him on, but trust me, that was not the case. He had been a friend for years, was in my wedding in fact, and was fully aware that I had no feelings for him. But now I was genuinely afraid of him. I asked him to leave, and he was no longer welcome, and he just refused. He said by law that he was required 30 days' notice to be evicted. When I spoke with the police, they understood my situation but explained that he'd either have to be evicted or I'd have to get a restraining order. So I filed the restraining order, which they immediately granted to me, but he just chose to ignore it. Once he left my home, I locked all the doors and windows, and when he returned, I showed him the order, to which he was not happy. I tried calling the police every time he showed up, but by the time that they got there, he was always gone. There were shoe prints on that door, and cracks from all the attempts that he made to force it open too. It never shut correctly after those attempts, and they were never able to officially serve him, because they supposedly just couldn't find him. I honestly believe that they probably tried once and then just gave up. I provided them with his plates, his friends' addresses, which he stayed, their previous employment, everything they needed. I'd stay up late, hearing his vehicle. It was really loud and easily identified. Slowly drive up my driveway, and he would just stare at me. Day and night, I would just be scared, looking through my window, just always with my phone in my hand preparing. At one time, he even hid behind my front door, had a mutual friend knock, and then jumped out and shoved the door open and entered. He even went as far to message my young, underage nephew, who he met maybe one time, on Facebook to try and gain sympathy and convince him to get me to change my mind, crossing even more obvious boundaries. Quite honestly, it was just a living nightmare. Eventually, though, he moved on to his next obsession, and I was finally somewhat at peace. But several months later, he was officially on our local news for attempting to slit his girlfriend's throat and beating her until she was unconscious, until a neighbor rushed over and he fled. All I could think of was how that could have been me. Apparently, free housing, food, cigarettes, and everything except a romantic relationship wasn't enough for him. He deserved a casual and sexual relationship as well. Back in middle school, I had science class with this kid, Stanley. We were about 12, and he was short and pale with splotchy red acne and greasy blonde hair and wireframe glasses. Despite that, though, he was actually fairly well liked, and I didn't see him as a particularly lonely guy or anything. His parents were divorcing, and apparently it was pretty ugly. He was forced to move in with his mother in another school district, which prompted him and his girlfriend to break up. They didn't want to do the whole long-distance thing. He was gone for a month, but apparently he couldn't stand to live with his mother and went back to his dad and our school district. His ex-girlfriend, in the meantime, got a new boyfriend and didn't want to go back to Stanley when he returned. Apparently, he didn't like that, and a few weeks later he was arrested. Because he had planned to lure the new boyfriend into the boy's bathroom, in which he planned to strangle him to death, saw up the body, and bury the pieces. The plan didn't go through because Stan's father noticed the concerning behavior and saw the Google searches for how to hide a body and how to build a bomb and all that sort of stuff, and Stan was arrested before the plan could go through. I know it sounds like a crazy rumor, but I actually still have the letter sent out to parents about the events and used to have the news articles too. Stan was actually sent to juvie for this, but towards the end of the school year he was back again. He was deadly quiet and no one talked to him, and he was never called on. Eventually we made it to high school, and I figured that was the last that I'd ever hear from Stan. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm graduating high school, and I'm waiting for my turn to get my diploma, and I hear them call his name. I remember my head shooting up, not believing that he was still around, and he was also still a classmate of mine. He stood up, shaking his fists in the air, and his friends were standing with him and cheering him on, and it was just all really surreal to me. He was taller, tanned with no acne, and his hair clean, and he had a pretty impressive beard for an 18-year-old. I mean, it was night and day to see literally the poster child for school shooter to grow up popular and fairly handsome. I check up on his Facebook every so often, and he's some sort of a southern redneck kid now. Not even a big gun fan. Pretty crazy to think that if it wasn't for his dad, his whole life could have changed, and for the worse. This happened during the summer of 2012 when I was 15 and still an active member of a local Boy Scouts troop. I went camping, something my troop had done frequently, and the camp we chose was a full weekend. It was a nice forested area with taller grass, and it also lacked any other campers, and we saw no cars driving in or out throughout the time that we spent there. Since we did not have to worry about other campers, our troop had a big campfire on Saturday night that went late into the night. Eventually, our campfire started to die out, prompting us to put it out and head to our respective tents and just hit the hay. Oddly for me, though, I was unable to sleep that night. I usually slept well on campouts, especially if I have the pleasure of using a tent alone, like I had done on this occasion, so I sat there in complete silence, just listening to the various sounds around my tent. Eventually, I found myself dozing off until I heard something walking nearby our campsite. There was a very apparent rustling of grass that began to get closer and closer to the blob tents that our boys were sleeping in. After a solid minute of movement, the sound stopped right in front of a tent that was about 7 or so feet in front of mine. I then heard the rustling start up again and head off in the direction of the forest. I was paralyzed with fear. I mean, what could that sound have been? I thought about it for a solid few minutes and eventually decided that it must have been an adult checking on us or something. Before I went to sleep, though, I looked out the little tent mesh window at the side of my tent and didn't see anything out of the ordinary in our campsite. This sound went on for a bit in the distance too, but I didn't record for how long, as I eventually just fell asleep. But I woke up later that night to the same sound of rustling, yet this time it was as close to our tent circle as the first time I heard it. While I didn't think too much of this, I silently listened to the sound to see where it was headed. It once again went to the same area it did the first time. But being curious, I peered through the tent window to see what was making the noise, and my face turned white and I couldn't move. My mind was still trying to register what was going on. I saw a large black figure just standing before the tent in the darkness. It was clear that it was not a scout, as the figure had no flashlight on and was far too large to be any boy in our troop. Suddenly, the figure inched their hand to the tent door and began to slowly unzip it. After what felt like several minutes, the figure seemed to poke their head into the tent. Immediately, after a deafening screech came from the tent, I heard other tents being unzipped and saw lights being flashed at the one tent, as well as a black figure start to run away from the tent. Within seconds, the figure was running out of view and into the line of trees. A few adults at the adult camp came to see the commotion, and the boys who were in the tent told them what they had experienced, and several boys mentioned that they heard the sound of rustling in the grass around our tents throughout the night. Unfortunately, none of the boys were able to get a clear view of the person, except that the figure looked like a man who was wearing dark clothing. Disturbed, the adults had us move to the campsite where they were staying at, and 2 adults volunteered to stay awake for the rest of the night in case of the creep's return. The next morning, we quickly packed our stuff up and left as fast as possible. We warned the ranger in charge, who called the local sheriff, and from what I know, the person was just never caught, and our troop just never camped there again. It was easily one of the most frightening experiences I've ever had, and something that I would always remember when I went camping during my time as a Boy Scout. I was about 12 years old, out trick-or-treating with my younger brother and my mum. My mum was following us, but letting us go ahead of her, about half the length of the strength of distance between us, I'd say. We get to a block where there aren't any houses lit up with lights or decorations, so it's pretty dark when we hear a man calling kids over to him. He was an overweight man, probably around 30 years old, with long hair, wearing a black t-shirt, a black baseball cap and jeans. I remember getting serious creepy vibes from him, but shrugging it off since Halloween is creepy anyways. He wasn't standing in front of a house too, just on the sidewalk. He wasn't telling anyone Happy Halloween or anything at all. He just stood there silently the entire time. He had a brown paper bag and was handing out what we presumed to be candy, so we approached him and opened our bags and he dropped some in. He must have run out pretty quickly though, because after serving a couple of small groups of kids after us, he just left quietly. When we got home, we dumped all our candy out onto the floor, and I noticed that we had somehow received some type of homemade candy wrapped in black electrical tape. I opened one and it was clear, melted looking and sticking to the tape, and it looked so odd that we just threw it away. A few weeks later, it had come out on the news that parents had been reporting their kids getting really ill after eating homemade candy laced with GHB from Halloween. They didn't know who gave it to them, but I think I do. Okay, so for starters, I'm 22 and I moved into this very nice apartment about 4 months ago. During the first 3 months there was nothing even remotely strange happening that I can recall. Not a noise in the night or anything mysteriously falling or anything like that, which makes these encounters just even weirder for me for some reason. Also, I should add that I have never had any paranormal encounters or even slight interest in the paranormal until now. So, about 2 weeks ago is where everything started to get really bizarre, and that's really the only word that I can use to describe what's been happening to me. 2 weeks ago, I was finishing up a movie, and I remember the time being 1 AM on the dot, and I turned out all the lights and went to the bathroom like I have every night since I moved in, and when I flicked on the light, I saw a man flash before my eyes, who had what looked like a top hat on, but it wasn't quite a top hat. I don't know what to call it, but he had some kind of black on his face, and the rest was white. Not pale, but completely white. His hands were too, and he had what looked like an old trench coat type of deal. I don't remember anything else, really, and when I flicked on the light, he was there for about a quarter of a second, and he looked very, very malevolent, and it wasn't just the fact that I had just seen a scary man in my bathroom at 1 AM that got me. When I looked into his eyes, I really felt this evilness that I just can't really describe, which is kind of why I guess I'm sharing this here in the first place, because I'm scared of it. I screamed at the top of my lungs, obviously, and I can honestly say that I've never done that before. I ran and flicked on my living room light and slept on the couch that night with the TV on. The next day, I tried to make myself believe that it was just a hallucination, but it was just so extremely vivid. It wasn't like a ghost or anything, it was straight up what looked like a physical body just standing in my bathroom. The day after the sighting, I was working on my computer too until I heard what sounded like one of my glass cups just breaking in the kitchen. It scared the shit out of me too because it was pretty loud, and I went to go and check it out, and I was pretty fearful to do so because I knew it might have something to do with what I saw the day before. I got into the kitchen and I saw a framed photo laying face down with glass pieces around it. This was one of my favourite things that I owned too. One of my dear friends gave it to me a week before she left for Stockholm. It was just a picture of us in front of the Colosseum. We both love everything about Italy, and I know it's not much, but it was very special to me and holds a place in my heart. So when I saw it on the ground, I honestly wasn't even scared. I was just sad as fuck. The picture itself was ripped down the middle too, literally almost splitting the two of us in the picture. I was angry because I remember yelling "fuck you" because I know it must have done it because I put that picture up the day I moved in. Over the next week, nothing happened except for one night. I was sleeping and I woke up and I was terrified, honestly, because I haven't woke up in the middle of the night since I was pretty much a kid. I'm a great sleeper. So I looked around my room and nothing was there. But about 15 seconds after, I heard what sounded like something come from my living room and fade out into my kitchen. It was a really weird sound, but it was kind of like sprinting. I didn't say a word, and I laid in bed trying not to move the blankets to make a noise. I can honestly say that I was more scared than when I was in the bathroom. My heart must have been beating 160 beats a minute. I stayed up for the next hour and a half too until I just accidentally fell asleep. This was dumb of me, I know, because it could have been an actual robber or something, and I just stayed in bed, but I can't even tell you how terrified I was in that moment. Everything was intact in my apartment the next day too. The night after that, I slept on my couch and I woke up to a noise which I could not explain to you if you had a gun to my head. It sounded just absolutely nauseating. It sounded like it was coming from my bedroom, but I couldn't really tell. All my lights were on, so I was definitely less scared, but I sat up because I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep after that. When I sat up, I noticed that there was a minuscule amount of blood on my pants. I pulled down my pants to see what it was from, and there were scratch marks that had 3 streaks. I was bleeding, not a lot, but it was definitely fresh. I was freaked out, obviously, because I definitely did not have those marks the day before. I went to the kitchen to clean myself up, not even looking in the bathroom's direction on my way there. And ever since then, every so often, I was hearing that same sound that I heard before. But however I describe the noise, it's not going to do it justice of just how truly unsettling it was. But it was almost like a little melody in a high-pitched raspy man's voice. I really can't afford to move right now, but this thing is obviously malicious. This is just really odd, so I don't expect straight-up help from any of you guys, but rather I just hope you can tell me what you would do in my situation. Update 1. So, thanks to everybody who's been offering me advice. It really makes me feel a lot better to have access to people with such knowledge of the paranormal. I've been listening to the audio from last night, and I didn't hear anything at all, and I'll update you guys if anything happens. Update 2. Hey guys, my coat rack just pretty much flew across the room. I'm getting kind of scared as this seems to be progressing badly. Should I use some sage or something? I'm getting a bit desperate. I heard sage can sometimes make things worse though. I'm also going to try and record audio tonight again. I'll update you guys. Update 3. So, the bathroom door just slammed hard and I heard things hitting the wall, and when I worked up the courage to finally open the door, my medicine cabinet was wide open and everything was just thrown into the bathtub. This is getting too real for me, and I just can't really handle this anymore. People are saying not to show it fear, but to be honest with you, I'm scared all day, every day, just waiting for the next thing to happen now. I might ask to stay at a friend's for a bit, but what's that going to do? Eventually I have to come back to my apartment. I need to get rid of whatever this is, pronto. Update 4. Hey, I was laying on my couch and I put my glass of water down next to me on the floor, and when I went to go and reach it to get it, it was just completely gone. And I still haven't found it. Like, I only took 3 sips of it and put it down. I mean, where could it have gone? Okay, so my first story is actually my friend's story. During the time that these things took place, we were all high school students. This is all happening in Florida, by the way. I already knew about skinwalkers and the like, but when these things happened to me, I wasn't sure if it really was a skinwalker or something else. I've noticed that most of the people who tell me that they've experienced the same phenomenon live in the area that I do, and my friend is no exception. His name is Jay. Jay lives about 10 minutes away from me. She told me that in her bus that there's this one area they drive by to drop this kid off, and she said that she doesn't know why, but it just gives her the creeps. Well, she told me that one early morning, it was still dark outside, when they were driving in that area to pick him up, all the kids in the bus and the driver saw this weird-ass deer running along the bus. It didn't run away from the bus. Instead, it ran beside it. She said that it looked weird as hell. You know, all the usual shit about it looking like some sort of humanoid deer because it just didn't look right. Like its limbs were bent in an awkward way, and she said its eyes were really freaky. Thing is that my friend didn't know jack shit about skinwalkers or any of that mumbo-jumbo, so I got pretty big chills from that. I tried being reasonable though, because, you know, maybe she just saw a regular deer and since it was dark she just got confused or something. Besides, it's Florida. I don't think we're supposed to get that type of stuff down here, right? However, Jay swore up and down that it wasn't like a normal deer. She said that they all saw it too, and the bus driver even slowed down to get a better look at it because everyone was weirded out by it and it was basically pandemonium. After a while, it ran off and disappeared. Jay couldn't have made this up too because, like I said before, she doesn't really know anything about skinwalkers or the goat man or whatever it could have been. So, anyway, I get freaked out because, well, here I am knowing about fucking skinwalkers and the goat man, and my friend is clueless thinking that she's just telling a regular story about some freaky-ass deer demon, so I asked her, "Do you know what skinwalkers are?" She just looked at me and said, "What's that?" I googled it and showed her those depictions of skinwalkers, and she goes, "Yeah, that's what I saw, except it had the head of a deer." She kept on saying it didn't look like an animal or a human, and that after a while the kid from that bus stop just didn't come back. Now, a couple of years before she told me this story, I found myself one night sitting in my backyard like really early, maybe 3 in the morning or so, because I was just thinking about personal things. I was just kind of chilling and enjoying the silence when all of a sudden I hear this really freaky-ass echoing scream from really far away. The only way I can describe it is as if it was like a woman and a cat were trapped together inside of a bag and screaming like they were about to get murdered. I know mountain lions, foxes and owls are a thing, and they make some weird-ass mating calls, but I've looked that shit up trying to debunk myself, and it just didn't sound anything like that. Like, usually you'd be able to tell if it's an animal, right? It's just common sense. Like my friend said before, that shit just didn't sound animal or human. It just sounded really fucking unnatural and weird. Now, me being me, I was pretty unfazed at first. A little concerned, yeah. Like, at first it was really far away, and I just thought it was a woman, and I actually thought that they might be killing people in the streets at 3 a.m. or something. The thing is, though, is that shit travelled fast. It was freaky as fuck, and the closer it got, the more weird and unnatural it sounded too. It only took me a couple of seconds to realize that that shit ain't a woman and it ain't a cat either. Because while those things were going down, I was going through it in my head like, what the hell is that? This thing went from sounding like it was a couple of miles away to being in my fucking neighborhood, and I swear, like, under 5 seconds. It was really fucking weird because 1 second it sounded so far away, and then the next it sounded like it was in my street. To be honest, I almost shit myself, and the second I stood up to leave, the scream just stopped. Like, it just dead-ass stopped, and I'm really thinking at this point that it's in the front of my house or something. I walked as calmly as possible back inside and locked the doors, and the scream was back to being far away again. It was weird as hell that night. I've also heard scraping and tapping on my window some nights, usually around the same time. I'd say 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning time frame, and I've seen black figures that weren't affected by light outside of my house too. To add details to these things so that you can get a feel for it, basically what happened is that I was doing a project for class, and since I procrastinate like a pro, I'm up until 2 a.m. I go to wash my hands from all the graphite, and as the water is running, I hear a scraping against one of the bathroom doors that leads to my backyard. Now, most of the door is made up of these glass panels that kind of make everything look like a bunch of blurry goops if you try to see out of it. And for a split second, I thought I noticed something pointy and ash grey scraping against the window. It almost looked ghost-like, I'd say, and I turned off the water and wait a little bit, and it comes back and scrapes against the window again. I'm trying not to freak out, but my hands are shaking at this point. It's stupid, but I actually whispered, "What are you doing?" while my voice trembled. It stopped, and I didn't hear anything except what sounded like someone walking by the window in my room every now and then. It continued that way for some nights too, off and on, and I would be hearing footsteps by my window and even a tap or two as well. Sometimes I just ignored them, and other times I looked out to see if someone was there, but there was never anyone. Another night, I'd been outside in my backyard again after having a rough day, and it was maybe 3 or so in the morning, and I'm sitting outside on the trampoline just relaxing. I suddenly noticed, though, that it's absolutely dead quiet. Like, that kind of uneasy silence that almost feels like a vacuum. I get this feeling of dread, like I'm being watched, and I snap my head to the left and catch a glimpse of a humanoid black figure ducking under the other side of my fence immediately. I'm a little freaked out because I noticed this thing was pure black. Like, the streetlight nearby didn't even hit it at all. It almost looked cartoony, if that makes any sense, because it's like the laws of physics just didn't even apply to this thing. Now, I would think that I would be crazy if it wasn't for a lot of kids in my school and around the area that I've told this to that have apparently all experienced the same shit. But one girl told me that she also heard tapping on her windows at night and even heard the screaming. It freaked me out because she explained it the same way that I did. She said it sounded like a woman or a cat, but not really like either. Another one of my friends who lives really close by told me that she saw dark figures in the woods and heard the screaming too. Pretty much everyone has heard this screaming, and it sounded the same. And that's the thing, it's in completely different time frames. And that's what's weird, because everyone's voice sounds different. So how could she describe the same thing that I did? So, after discussing it with a few friends, we all agreed from that point on that our town was just fucking haunted, but I don't know. I mean, if there's any animal that sounds like that, I want to know, because that shit just didn't sound like anything that I've heard before, so I'd like to be enlightened. The only person I've heard of who's seen anything remotely specific is my first friend from art who went on that bus, and apparently it's like really bad to talk about skinwalkers, and even worse if you see them. Apparently it's like bad mojo or something. I know from what I've read too that these things are said to be able to travel really quickly, so Thinking about that made it seem like what we experienced was a skinwalker. But to be honest, I really hope that there's just a logical explanation that we aren't aware of. Also, today I asked my co-worker, who's also my friend in high school and lives nearby too, and he got all spooked and said that he's seen and heard the same things. He's very spiritual though, and often has visions and whatnot, and he told me that he believes that they're doing dark magic in the woods because of a dream that he had about some hooded group sacrificing a woman and a cat or something. Which is kind of freaky because it also turns out that behind our local dog park there's a patch of woods with some really shifty shit in there. I was shown this by an acquaintance during my freshman year who lives a couple of streets away. Down the path in the woods after some time of walking there's this huge cross that's just smack dab in the middle of nowhere. It's basically raw, crooked-ass wood just nailed together into a cross with a rope hanging from where you would put your hands if you were getting crucified or something. It's huge too, and whenever I decide to check it out, I always feel uneasy. Like this feeling that if I stay for too long, something bad will happen. It doesn't look like a grave or anything, to be honest, but who knows? Anyway, he says that I'm not the first person that he knows who's told me about experiences like this, and he's also had his own experiences with this humanoid figure. He says that he saw one and it turned and looked at him directly in the eye as if it immediately knew what he was looking at. And so, basically, we just don't fuck with shit in the woods anymore. So, I'm a pretty big girl. Not extremely obese, but chunky enough that it's obvious. And it's not due to diet or anything. I have PCOS, which can cause issues with weight due to the pituitary gland releasing the wrong type of hormones. And with this comes insulin resistance, which is like pre-diabetes. It's reversible, but not always effective. As such, in my 20s, I'm on a drug called metformin. Metformin, or glucophage, depending on what name you know it by, isn't an addictive substance. It's used to control high insulin, and I have to take it at my heaviest meals, lunch and supper, so I'm usually toting around this giant pill bottle full of white tablets. The reason why I do this is because I work part-time and attend university. I live in the dormitory of my university and have to take transit to work and back, with a bus switch downtown. Around the area where I have to switch my bus are numerous cafes and convenience stores. Needless to say, I've grabbed something to eat from them numerous times. Oh, and finally, I tend to dress goth or punk too. My head's shaven on the side and I've got a few piercings. Mostly I'm left alone, but there have been times where some wise asses decide to have a go at me, particularly on Friday nights. And so, with all that information, here's the story. So, it was Friday, the 2nd of November, to put things into perspective. My instructor was ill, so class was cancelled and I had an extra hour to get to work. I usually grab a quick deli sandwich and coffee from a cafe at the closest to the bus stop and stick it in my backpack so I can eat it on my break. This Friday, with extra time on my hands, I decided upon arriving at my stop to stay at the cafe. I go in and order my usual plain latte and turkey bacon wrap, and sit down next to the window so I can keep an eye on the stop. I have my earbuds in and I'm listening to a podcast, just going through the motions. Once finishing my wrap, I unzip the front pocket of my backpack and fish out the bottle of pills, pop it, and wash it down with my latte. All at once, though, this guy just comes up to my table and motions for me to take my earbuds out. For a description, he's pretty tall, kind of burly, white as a sheet with his broom moustache, wearing clean civilian clothes. Nothing that set off my alarm bells, but being confused, I do so, and he tells me, "Excuse me, miss, but what exactly are those?" He was talking about my pills. The thing with me is that I'm pretty confrontational when I feel threatened, so I said to him, "None of your business." Then, this guy pulls open his jacket, flashing me a police badge. Only he did it so quickly that I couldn't make out the details, just the shape and nothing else. Listen, ma'am, I think it is. What are those, narcotics? At this point, I'm in complete shock. The rational part of my brain is shut off because I'm so caught off guard by this random man, potentially a cop, looming over me. And no is all I could get out. That's so, he says and picks up my pill bottle. Also, if you know medication, then you know that they put your full name on the damn label, as well as what it is. And before I can tell him to give it back, he puts it in his pocket and quickly goes. He says that he's confiscating them, and if I want to come downtown to discuss this matter further, then I suggest that we do so now, before I've placed you under arrest. Okay, so at this point, I must admit that I'm half calling bullshit, half unsure of what to say or how to react. All I'm able to say is a flat-out no, like a bit of a moron. Do you want to be placed under arrest, miss? I'm a cop. I can do that. And then he fishes out this pair of handcuffs. They're not the fluffy, kinky ones either you'd expect a fake cop to have. They're real and, as far as I can tell, metal. I'd recommend you just follow me to my car, miss, so that we can have a chat. Of course, my sense of rationality is still undermined by the sheer ridiculousness of this situation, so I end up just blurting out, I'm not using drugs, bad ones. That's medicine. He says this cliché, that's what they all say, and proceeds to reach for my arm. When he grabs it, my senses finally come to me, and I pull back up against the window. I yell, give me back my medication loud enough to get attention from the patrons and staff. He says, miss, I'm asking you to come quietly, and I just keep my mouth running. I say, that's my fucking medication for diabetes and I need it. It says so on the bottle. If you're a cop, give me back my pills and call for backup. Better yet, I proceeded to grab my phone. I'll call the cops here because there's been a mistake. And that got him pissed off. He says something along the lines of, you're resisting arrest, and tries to grab my arm again. At this point, I'm dialing 911 and one of the baristas is coming out from behind the counter. He asks this guy, what the hell are you doing? And it finally scares the creep and he takes off, granted with my fucking medication in his pocket. I speak to the dispatcher and the real cops, and they show up within minutes. I speak to the cops and explain what happened. The barista also tells them that this guy had been sitting in the cafe for over an hour before I showed up, but hadn't been bothering other customers, just me apparently, and the cops took surveillance from the security cameras, though of course there was none pointing out onto the road. I actually had to go to the station to file a report because, yep, there were no undercover narc cops in that area that day. I suspected as much, I must admit, but in our society, you're kind of inclined to believe and trust in authority figures. These days, not so much, I suppose, but disobeying them isn't in our programming usually. It really isn't in mine either, but the whole thing was just fishy from the get-go. Considering, of course, that it was my fucking metformin that he took, I had to replace the entire 3-month bottle and go several hours between doses, something that puts me at risk of hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. I'm of course quite pissed off at this asshole still, but I'll admit that I'm also fully aware and freaked out that I was in a whole lot of danger too. It's not common where I live, but human trafficking is actually a thing, and the fact that this guy wanted me, a lone female who looks like the type to use some kind of illegal substance, stereotypes suck, I know, to go with him alone just kind of got to me. I mean, what if my common sense hadn't have kicked in, or the barista hadn't have done something? The people around us sure as shit didn't pull a "what are you doing" and come to my rescue or anything. I guess the biggest thing that's freaky though is that not only is this guy not caught yet, I haven't heard from the cops in almost a week, but he has a bottle of my pills out there with my unique first and last name. I hope he doesn't do anything with it, but anybody have any ideas of what to do from here? Update. Hey guys, so almost a week later, and guess what turned up? No, Not the guy, sadly enough, but my pills have been recovered. The bottle was found a few blocks away, still half full, by eyeballing it. Well, I can't take my remaining doses though, and apparently since this guy wanted to abduct me, yes, the cops are legit calling it an attempted abduction now, he could have tampered with the medication or something. I know next to nothing aside from what I watched on CSI and L&O, but if there's an actual risk of that, they can have them. Not that I could take it anyways, but anyway, the cops are keeping the bottle for evidence because fingerprints exist. That's the most exciting thing that's happened to me so far regarding this. I've been keeping my eyes out in case fake cops come wandering onto my campus or something, and yes, I did switch my bus route. I'm taking the long way now, which I didn't enjoy, but until they catch the creep, that's the way it's got to be, I suppose, unfortunately. Otherwise, I've gotten no creepy phone calls, no random people texting me, no cryptic messages on my social media platforms, nothing really. If this guy is smart though, he wouldn't even try anyways. I'm really hoping that he's smart too for my own sanity. I'll update again if they do catch the guy, or if I, by some bizarre unlucky chance, encounter him again. Update. So, this can finally all be put to rest, guys. The fake cop was arrested yesterday after being caught following a woman a few streets away from the cafe. The cops called me when they brought him in, and based on my description, the one that I shared with you guys, and him fitting it, they asked if I could come in for a lineup. And sure enough, he was in there. I'm pressing charges for the attempted abduction and a few other things. I mean, the dude did try to aggressively grab me. The other woman thankfully isn't harmed too. That's all I really know right now. Not his name or motives or anything really. Plus, it's all I can really say about this anyway because, of course, since I'm pressing charges, this could go to trial. And if we're all crime junkies like I am, then you know that linking out information could in fact damage the case and whatnot. But I digress. The guy's been caught and his ball is set and I'm in pretty much no danger anymore. I can finally start taking my usual bus route to work again, which is nice. Also, I just want to say thank you to everyone for your support and advice. Knowing my penchant for attracting creepers' attention, I'll probably have something to share again later, I'm sure. If I do learn more details, then you know that I'll share them. But for now, though, my creepy encounter is over, and I'm gonna move on with my life. Take care. My father died in 2008 when I had just completed my high schooling and we were in enormous amounts of debt. I still am in poverty, but that story can be told another day. So, to continue my studies, I needed to find work, and for 3 years I sold picados on the street and taught little children maths. In 2012 I was recruited into an ISP in our small town to work the night shift. During the interview, I was particularly asked if I would feel scared to stay alone at night in the third story of the enormous building with one security guard in the ground floor. I was never comfortable, but I needed the job. Plus, being at a night shift, I could attend my college during the day and all that. So, I worked in that office between February of 2012 to August of 2013, and during this time, I never got curious to ask anyone why no one wanted to work at night. I heard, before me, that someone used to work at night, but he just left abruptly. My work was to pick calls from clients who would have problems with their internet connection and provide simple solutions. Anything complex, and I had to note down their names and address and pass the list to my senior via email, and technicians would take care of them during the next day. It was a simple job, and I wouldn't receive many calls, and so, by 11, I would just spread out a thick blanket on the floor and fall asleep with the receivers beside my head in case somebody phoned. June 2013, though, was the month that I found out why no one was ready to work at night. That night, the security guard with whom I had developed a very close friendship came to the third floor and asked me if he could sleep in my room as there were too many mosquitoes in the ground floor. Understand that he was supposed to stay awake, but he used to take advantage of my altitude and sleep every night, and the whole building had no security camera. Anyway, we were both sleeping in the same room. The two receivers were on either sides of my head, and the lights were turned off. I had locked the door loosely, keeping the lights on in the corridor. And at 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound as if someone was walking with his feet dragging to the floor. It was a really strange sound, and really loud too. I was facing the door and could see the light on the other side of the door through the thin gap between the floor and the door. I stayed down, staring directly at the gap, trying to understand what or who it was, and as I waited, the sound got louder and louder, and soon I saw feet of someone crossing my door. My heartbeat got faster, but I thought that it must have been the security guard, but when I looked behind me, he was fast asleep. My blood froze at this, and the sound started to get louder again, and soon the feet appeared near my door. This time, instead of just crossing my door, it stopped there too and didn't move. I waited for whoever it was to move away, but he wouldn't. And then I did the stupidest thing. I thought it could be an intruder, and instead of waking up the security guard quickly, I tiptoed to the door while the thing still stood there and pulled it open suddenly. And there was no one, but a gust of wind hit my face, causing me to get goosebumps all over. I woke up the guard now and explained to him everything. He took out his torch and turned on all the lights and searched the whole building, but couldn't find anyone. Finally, he came to me and said that it could be a demon. Well, after that, I couldn't sleep again. I dropped messages to those who worked during the day explaining this shit too, and I reached the office the next day a little early to catch the others. This was when the story started to emerge too. One explained to me that he had the night shift a few days, and he would always hear someone climbing up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. Another said that he saw a chair being moved around from one corner of the terrace to another by something that wasn't visible. And that was apparently why no one would like to work at night, and stayed there for more than a year. I left the company in August after they gave me an increment of $3 after working for more than 1 year. They used to pay me $54 a month, and yes, I know, the salary is scarier than the story, but I needed to grasp anything that I could find to complete my bachelor's degree. I used to attend college in the morning and teach from afternoon to twilight and then go to the office. The cost of education and staying alive plunged me into further debt from which I'm yet to recover completely. But they installed cameras in the office these days, and I sometimes wonder if they've been able to capture anything. I have plans to upload my personal paranormal stories, including this one, to my newly opened channel, Many Realities, someday, where I share strange but real stories of people around the world that defy explanation. I'd love to see you there, but that was my story, and man, it was weird. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said indentured servants or workforce generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until next summer. I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, etc. AKA my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the fall months so that he could make more money while depriving me of even further of the will to live. And so I had to hire people who were in the painting business for whatever reason, but just couldn't find a job with a reputable company. And so they had no option but to work with us. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but had impressed me over the phone. As I was essentially painting entire houses myself or with a skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers, I didn't interview him in person, just told him to show up ready to go and to meet me and a crew at the new job site at 9 a.m. on Monday. Life happens as it does, and I had a family emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining to help Jim get used to the way that we worked and to make sure to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, to send him home and he'd start over with me the very next day. At 9:45 a.m. and my phone is blown up with texts and calls. I'm at awake, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone that I'm staring at a dead family member, and you know this, now what? And they say, "Dude, Jim isn't okay." What? What do you mean? He's fucking insane. He's ruining the person's roof and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to just shut the fuck up. To be honest, I thought at the time that Jim had a point with the last part, since my crew spent more time talking than painting. But I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this new dude up on the roof to paint a teeny space, which would take about 5 minutes with a brush. Homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a halfpipe. And so the entire black roof area below him is just covered in beige paint. I tell them to get him down and send him home, and I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on, and he brushes it off, saying that Jim called him to apologize and to tell him that he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. Boss doesn't consult me and says it's fine and I have to deal with it. Great. So, a new job site, new day, and I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade until he was put in jail for armed robbery, a jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, though, he was really polite, respectful, and deferent. I had asked to speak to him alone before I let him set foot on my job site, and he was completely upfront about his jail time and what led to it, answering any questions that I had. I was convinced, and he honestly did an excellent job. My boss stopped by the first time in forever, actually, and was also impressed by Oscar. So impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a new job by themselves, a job that was mostly trim work for a family of mum, a pop, and 3 daughters, 15, 11, and 7. He also decided that he would take care of all the customer interaction with the exception of me, dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. And sure, fine. Halfway through the job, 2 days in, I show up like a good peon, massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar just look at him and then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. I don't really care about anything anymore, so I just do it. Oscar sprints to my car and tells me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss had been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day that I came, and he would make sure that I talked to them. I thanked Oscar and told him that I would deal with it right then, and requested that he hang around and proceed as if everything is fine in case I needed his assistance in any capacity. I pulled into the driveway, nodded at Jim, and knocked on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic and hot mother, mind you. My family was Russian, so I was treated to a deluge of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest made me think Red from OINTB found out that I didn't like her food or something. Apparently, Jim had been very opportunistic about his ladder positions as he worked on the 2nd floor of the house, and they were conveniently always able to see directly into the girls' bedrooms, which, apparently, he took pictures of on his phone. He also made multiple comments to the girls as they came home from school that were a sizable step over the line of pedophilia, but a freaking football field past the line of how you speak to a customer or their kids, period. Massively inappropriate sexual innuendos, the works. I managed to keep myself from melting into the floor and promise them that this will be dealt with immediately. And with that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine was dead, and after he hands it over, I find almost 100 pictures of the various bedrooms from every angle possible, zoomed in and everything. He sees me open the pictures from his position on the ladder and starts flying down and screaming at me. He launches at me and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. The police were called and I handed over the phone and was interviewed. But poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said that they would work with the family and take it from there. Great, so I finished the job with Oscar and we get tipped, and the family thanked us for our role in helping them, as they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes and I'm home watching TV in the living room, and it's about 9 p.m. Light floods the room as my car pulls up my neighbour's driveway with its brights on. I don't care and I just continue watching TV. A few minutes pass and I hear yelling from my neighbour's house. I look out the window and it's Jim's car in their driveway, because my boss had given him my phone address as to where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at the neighbours where was I, when really all he had to do was turn around to see my idiotic slack-jawed face staring at the window about 6 feet away. But then he pulled out a handgun and started motioning at the wife. But before I can even register that this is actually happening, or grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something, my living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple police cars pull up and consequently arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15 and another a shotgun. He apparently had only taken one out to wave over his head, leaving the other 3 in the car because he wasn't 100% sure which house was mine. My neighbours are elderly and nosy and snarky and call the cops on any and everything of little to no consequence, and they called as soon as his beater car pulled up in their driveway, and their knee-jerk 911 reaction, it likely saved my life that day.